What's going on, everybody? Bronze Age Mage here, and I've definitely got to say I totally did not just drive through a village. It had to have been a town, a sub-city, as opposed to a sin city. I don't know. But what's going on, everyone? Bronze Age Mage just, in fact, played the gameplay demo for Resident Evil The Village, and man, oh man, that was exciting, that was riveting, and I do love how it was set up. It is free to play now on, I want to say, all major platforms, of course. Free download. You get an hour to play, and it is broken up into two separate sections. They are the village and the castle. And I did complete both of them. I'd like to say that I do think that I am a halfway decent Resident Evil veteran to some degree. However, there are a couple of Resi games that I have not been able to beat yet. I'll get to them, I promise. Don't worry. Don't you fret. Don't panic. We'll scratch them off my bucket list. But I was kind of surprised when I got to play it, and I realized that there was a whole mess of new things going on there, as well as some things that I do question, but I want to wait to play the game before I start yammering on about all the deep intricacies of story and narration and plot and things, since I really haven't. All I have is just trailers to go off of, and as of right now, the trailers are kind of shaping some of my past characters that I have grown with in unique directions, but we'll leave that at that for now. You predominantly play as Ethan Winters in the first-person mode of Resident Evil 7. So it's a very new part of it's a new era for the Resident Evil series, and I find it unique, interesting. It doesn't quite feel the same as far as the creatures go, because I definitely don't remember there being any forms of werewolves or vampires in my Resident Evil games. I do remember zombies, but there were lore reasons and story reasons for all of that to happen. So I am intrigued to see what they do with it. I'm sure that the source material is going to be taken care of. The game looks absolutely gorgeous. I can hope. Capcom. Hope you're listening. Stay tuned. But I digress. As I've grown up with the entirety of the series, I realized that there were a whole bunch of different styles across the board that Resident Evil had actually gone through. And I had actually grown up with the vast majority of them as a whole. There are still as I said before, there are a couple games that I hadn't fully played through yet, or haven't actually been able to properly experience. But I would like to play each and every one of them, since I consider myself a large fan of the franchise. But I do know that all the original ones, as opposed to the new age, were all what were the first coining of the term survival horror. And of course, a lot of people tend to interpret survival horror as take control ridden, lack of resources, having tough as nails gameplay to actually, as what creates the whole entire genre. Well, most of those things are pretty close to accurate. I don't personally feel that tank controls are necessary for a survival horror game. I do think that they were what helped shape the very essence of what survival horror was. And they were able to do some very miraculous things in those old school games. So, of course, the games that did go through that whole entire style were the original and director's cut of Resident Evil 1, its remake, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3, Nemesis, Resident Evil Code Veronica, and then, of course, there is Resident Evil 0, which was a later creation around the same times that Resident Evil 1 Remake came out on the GameCube. I didn't get to play those games back when they first came out. It wasn't until a couple years ago when they did, which just made me realize that, damn, this series has been around for a long time, and it just feel like it made me date myself there. Whoa. Okay, but I digest. Then they shifted over to try to keep the fan base in the evolving times. It didn't seem like the tank controls and still cameras were going to be something that would continue on with the consoles of the time, and the technology had to be pushed to a different degree. While I do think that when they did Resident Evil Code Veronica, they did a fantastic job of being able to do something. It did feel a little bit empty compared to the older games. I don't know if that was because they just didn't want to fill in all of the environments, or is because of not graphical limitations, but hardware limitations, since it was tank controls and it wasn't exactly fixed camera. The world itself actually moved around when the camera shifted and panned to the left or the right to kind of give every area that you went through a little bit of extra life. It was nice, but it just seemed like it was slowly stepping away from what the original design and graphics could do on the older games. Then they shifted over to what was popularized by Resident Evil 4 of the over-the-shoulder camera and aiming system, which was really neat. It was a revolution of the time, and of course it did coin a lot of other things, but things such as the QuickTime event as we now know it. And it might not have even had a name before that, but it did take away from what originally was the series, in my opinion. And it was no longer that survival horror concept. Yeah, it was still a little creepy, still a little scary, but you had a lot more control of yourself, and you no longer also had the limited resources. You had resources that would come to you when you were actually defeating enemies. You could increase the difficulty to decrease that, but overall you weren't bound by the puzzles and structures of your environment. You didn't have to be as cautious or sneak around certain things, certain monsters or anything the way you did in the older games. And of course, the Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6 infamously are ones all that actually started having all the over-the-shoulders. Now, the interesting thing about it is that just because it is over-the-shoulder cameras doesn't necessarily mean that it can't be survival horror. When they did recreate the Resident Evil 2 and 3, those were definite proof of that concept. However, I have mixed opinions about Resident Evil 3 Remake, but I'll get to that in a separate time. Resident Evil 2's remake was absolutely astronomical in what it was able to accomplish, achieve, and it gave you all of those abilities to feel like you were some kind of super flexible person to be able to actually control where you were going and shooting. You still felt very helpless against all of the hordes of creatures that were literally amassing upon you. It got the formula down right, as opposed to some of the other games in the franchise that actually happen to just allow you to mow things down in a mass quantity, which once again doesn't necessarily mean that 4, 5, and 6 were bad. I liked 4. I loved 5, Resident Evil 5 as what I would have felt would have been a decent close to the franchise. There's your big joke. Thanks, Chris. But of course, Resident Evil 6 did have its fun, and it did have an amazing mercenary mode attached to it. That was great. But then, after Resident Evil 6, there was just some stagnation on where in the Blue Blazes that they could actually take the franchise to, and try to steer it back into a popular game again. Since Resident Evil 6 was not just panned again from the average person, but overall it just really kind of bombed because they had to go for this whole entire more bigger, better, quote unquote better kind of a concept, as opposed to playing with the formula that was there in the first place that made the games what they were. So they did that. They went back to the drawing board, and then they created Resident Evil 7, which was definitely not like the originals, but it was a different experience compared to what has been done at this time for the franchise. Granted, I think that some of the concepts that they used to kind of shift the series into are things that have been around in that particular time frame. Video games, Outlast is one of the games that come to mind on the helplessness that you had, but you at least did have a chance to defend yourself in the game like you would in any of the older Resident Evils, but you didn't feel overpowered in any way throughout your entire experience, unless you're some kind of mad, crazy speed runner that I've never encountered before. But I am not, because I can't quite say that I'm that good. I'm just an enthusiastic gamer. But those are some of the shifts that they had there, and now they're going back to Resident Evil 7's mode in Resident Evil 8. And I've got to say, the gameplay from that little time I played it felt smooth, it felt comfortable, but it did feel it felt unnerving in the ways that survival horror should feel unnerving. I am excited to play this game. I'm looking at it in a way that it's going to be fun in its own right. I'm not sure how I'm going to feel about it as a Resident Evil game particularly, but then Resident Evil 7 was the same kind of a way. I wasn't quite sure what to expect after what happened with Resident Evil 6, but it ended up surprising me deeply. I'm just unsure of where they're going to pass along the concepts of werewolves and those kind of creatures into the story that it had nothing to do with that kind of mythology or what have you. So there you have it, everybody. There was my first miniature thought process on Resident Evil 8 The Village, and hard segued it into a light breakdown of what the Resident Evil series had to offer. All the mainstream ones, of course. All the sub games are something that I have played, and so quite a few of them. They all have their own kind of. They all seem to fall in those same kind of category, as well as the time frame they came out with the main storyline or main numbered parts of the series. So I hope to play it soon. It's coming out May 7th. I consistently travel for work, so hence the Road to videos that I like to put up every week, at least hopefully twice a week if I'm lucky. But I don't get to be home enough to actually sit down and enjoy these games at this particular moment. I'm still hoping on building a rig that is decent enough to be able to play these games and upload all the content, as well as being able to edit it. Once that happens, then I'm going to be starting to do game reviews directly or breakdowns of video games and Let's Plays. I always do Let's Plays on my channel. So thanks so much, everybody, for letting me rant and ramble and banter on with you once again. And I'd always appreciate it if you'd be willing to like, share, and subscribe to the Bronze Age Mages one-of-a-kind, balanced videos, because of course they are. And if you comment down below, give you a like across it. Don't care what it says. Alright, everybody, have a wonderful day. Stay safe, buckle up, enjoy the ride.